Now that we have done that one example, before we continue with all the other lectures, let us do a more systematic and a slower approach to understanding the entire interface of Power Query and how do you work on it when you're working with an Excel file. When you select data and you select get data, there are different types of data sources that you can connect to. So we have an Excel workbook, text and comma separated values, XML files, JSON files, PDFs, and a folder. The folder option works not just with Excel files, but with any other data type as well. Databases are SQL Server, Access, SQL Server Analysis Services. Then you have Microsoft Azure. You have Power BI datasets. This is a new option that has got added. Other sources are from table oblique range. This is what allows you to pick up data from the existing Excel file. You can connect directly to the internet. You can import data from object data models or data feeds. Then you also have blank queries that you can create. So this would be a query from scratch. In combined queries, we have merge and append. So merge is similar to how you do a merge on SQL, or for those of you who are not worked with SQL, this is how you do a VLOOKUP. But of course, on Power Query, you have different ways of doing a merge. By clicking on data source settings, it tells you here's the current workbook and any previous workbooks that you have already opened. Query options allows you to see certain properties. We don't typically make any changes here, but in case you want to go and make any change to the setting, you can do that here as well. For example, something that I typically like to change is to remove this option which creates a relationship between tables when adding the data to the data model for the first time. But that is just a matter of personal preference. And for all of you who are working on Power Query for the first time, I would strongly advise you not to make any changes to the query options, just work with the default. So let me cancel that. All right, now we want to take a simple example. I have name and I have sales value. We have ABC and we have 1, 2, and 3. Now the first thing you would notice is that in its current form, I will not be able to send the data to Power Query. If you look at the description, it says that you can create a new query linked to the selected Excel table, which means that if the selected data is not part of a table, then it will be converted into a table. Notice carefully when I click on this button, Power Query does not give me an option. It forces me to convert it into a table. My advice always would be not to depend on Power Query's ability to automatically convert into a table. You should always select your data set, click on Insert, select a table, and press OK. One more suggestion, whenever you make a table, always make sure to click on Table Design and select the table name and give a name of your choice. I've seen a lot of clients who don't do this step and suddenly they realize that they have 15 tables in their workbook and all of them are named with no pattern, and it becomes very difficult to keep a track of all these tables. So I'm going to call this introduction. All right. Now that the table has been created, we can select data and then click on from table oblique range. Power Query editor will open up. Now do remember that when the Power Query window is open, you will not be able to press Alt Tab to switch back and forth between your Excel file and the Power Query editor. I know it's a big limitation and we are hoping that Microsoft will resolve this in the future. But as it stands, Alt Tab does not work. So you will not be able to work with any other Excel file on your system till the moment you don't close the Power Query window. It is a limitation, but that's how it works. You have to be aware of this. On the left side, we have a list of different queries. In fact, let me just remove all the older ones so that it doesn't confuse you. Okay. As you can see, we only have a single query right now called introduction. On the right side, you have the name of the query. So I can simply click inside and call this sample data. You notice that the name here and the name here on the left are mapping with each other. All right. Okay. Then you have the applied steps box. This is a list of all the steps that are being recorded. So think of this a little bit like an Excel macro, which means that every single action that we are performing or is being performed automatically is being recorded by Power Query so that you can repeat those actions. So the first action was Excel.current workbook. The name is introduction and content. So even if you are looking at this for the first time, I'm sure it would make sense. This means that from the current workbook, I'm taking a table called introduction and I'm pulling all the content from that table. What does the second step do? It changes the data type of every single column. So if you look carefully, it is ABC 1 to 3, which means it can be a number or text, and this is also ABC 1 to 3. But in the second step, you notice that the data type has been changed automatically. So sales has been detected to be a number and name is a text value. Power Query does this automatically, and this is very, very helpful because when you're working with 24, 35 columns, it is very, very handy to have the ability to do an auto detection. Now, sometimes you might not want this to happen. For some reason, you want the numbers to appear as a text value. You can simply click on this icon and then convert it to a text value like this. Okay, so let me change that back to a number. Let's do a small calculation. So I'll remove all the annotations. We want to have a calculation where we want to see the target for next year, which is a 10% increase over the current year. For this, we click on add column. We can add a custom column. A custom column allows you to write your own functions. The column name that we want is target, and the custom column formula can be written by us. Power Query supports IntelliSense, right? So you can just Google what IntelliSense is. IntelliSense is a programming feature. So in fact, let me quickly show that to you. Right? So IntelliSense is a code completion which works with nearly all programming languages, and this allows you to automatically complete your code. For example, if you're writing a certain word, you don't need to write the entire word. You can just write the first few letters and you can see a list of all the different words that start with those letters. For example, if I write text, T-E-X-T, you will notice that I get a list of every single function that starts with text. This can be very handy, especially because there are so many different functions that are available on Power Query. It's very difficult to remember all of these, so it's very handy to see that this option is available. All right. So I want to create a target. To do this, we can click on the sales column and then insert like this. Or you can even type SALE. You notice you get the option called sales and you can double click on it and you get the column like this. Into 1.1. Now notice carefully, if you make a mistake, for example, I kept this parentheses unnecessarily, the OK button is not visible and it says that there is a error in my formula. And when I click on this, it tells me that this is the part that has an error in it. Now this is very handy because unlike Excel where you don't know whether you made a mistake or not till you try to run the formula, Power Query real-time checks whether you are making a mistake or not. So if I remove it, it says that no syntax errors have been detected, and when I press OK, it gives me the result like this. So what has happened is that on the right side, a new column has been added, or rather a new step has been added called added custom. If you want to change the formula, you can either change it in the formula bar directly, or you can click on this gear icon and that will open up the formula bar and you can make a change here as well. The choice is completely up to you. You can either click on the gear icon or you can directly select the value in the formula bar. If you can't see the formula bar, make sure that in the view tab, the option called formula bar has been enabled. All right. What else do I want to show you? So we have seen that the steps have been recorded. You know what? Let's take the data back to Excel and we will come back to Power Query. So when I close and load, there are two options. I can either close and load it to a new sheet, or I can close and load it to the existing sheet. So for now, I want to load it to a different sheet. So we select the first option and a new sheet is created which has the dataset in it. Let's go back and add another value. So we write DNE and then 4 and 5. If you want to refresh this, you will simply have to right click and then refresh. This is one way of doing it. The other way would be to click on query and then select refresh from here. There is also a query and connection dialog box that opens up on the right side. Here as well, when you right click, you notice the refresh button will not be there, but you can always edit your query from here. So let me close this. When we're working on the Power Query output, when I click on edit, it will reopen Power Query editor so that I can make any further changes. The other option to do this would be to right click, select table and then say edit query. This will also open up the Power Query editor. Now sometimes it might happen that you are happy with the output and you don't want this output to be linked to your data set. So you can right click, select table and select unlink from data source. It gives you a confirmation saying that this will permanently remove the query definition. Are you sure you want to continue? We don't want to do that, so I'll cancel this. If you click on properties, there is an option to refresh at intervals. So you can set it to 1 minute, which means that every minute Power Query will automatically refresh the data so that you don't have to go back and right click and refresh every single time. So I think we have covered all the basics. I told you that it is imperative to make a table before you're creating a query. Once you've created a query, you will not be able to work with Power Query editor and Excel file at the same time. So you will have to close Power Query editor to be able to access your Excel file. Once you have the data with you, if you want to put it on a different sheet, you can simply cut it and put it on a different sheet. That will work as well. And if you notice, when I refresh, the data gets refreshed like this. Let me quickly hop over back to the Power Query editor. All these steps are there. Do remember that the smallest of actions that you're performing will be remembered by Power Query. For example, let's say I want to create another column, which is a duplicate of the target column. So I will click on add column, custom column, and we can say duplicate, and this is equal to simply the target column, and this will create a duplicate column like this. You will not be able to press Ctrl Z to undo your action. If you want to undo the last step that you performed, you will have to come here and then click on the close or rather the cross here so that the last step has been deleted. Like this. Now let's say you performed a number of actions. For example, I created a custom column which is target, and then perhaps I selected sales and I created another column for sales as well. If you want to remove both of these steps, you can right click and say delete until end. That means that both the fourth and the fifth step will be deleted. When you have a very large number of steps in a Power Query applied steps box, you might want to change the name. So you can simply right click. Right click allows you to change the formula. So you can or rather double click allows you to change the formula. You can right click and rename, and here you can call it whatever you want to call it. For example, I say added my target, something like this. Remember, this is optional, but this is very, very important, highly recommended, because right now we only have 3 steps and we remember what those steps were. But in case you have written 50 steps, you might forget what you did and when you did it. So it is important to make sure that you are commenting it properly. If you want to see a list of all the steps that you have created, you can click on Home and then select Advanced Editor. And this will open up a box in which you can see a list of all the steps that you have performed. So if you notice, my first step was to select the data from my Excel workbook. My second step was to change the data type. My third step was to add the target column as per 1.2. So we won't worry too much about the advanced editor right now. The advanced editor is handy when you want to perhaps copy the entire query and send it across to somebody else, which is very useful because you don't have to send individual steps to somebody. You can just copy all the steps like this and just copy and paste it and send it on an email to somebody else, and they can just make the changes here that they require. For example, let us just say that I want to convert the name called target into my target. So if you notice, I can make the change here directly in advanced editor, and when I press done, the change will reflect here as well. So I've shown you 3 ways of making a modification. You can either click on the gear icon, you can either directly select the value in the formula bar, or you can go to advanced editor. That will allow you to see every single step one below the other, and you can make as many changes as required. So I think that was a fairly comprehensive introduction. Of course, there are a lot more things available on Power Query. Over the course of the next lectures, I will be explaining all these topics in a lot of detail. So look forward to the next few lectures.